Hello and welcome into the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. I'm your host, TJ Mabardi. Today is Wednesday, May 22nd, and last night we got an unbelievable start to the Eastern Conference Finals series between the Boston Celtics and Indiana Pacers. Game went to overtime, and it was the Celtics able to really escape with that game because it did seem like down the stretch there, Indiana threw it away a little bit. So we're going to be talking about that game. Then we are also going to be talking about sort of more general playoff thoughts. I'm going to be giving my rankings on the top 10 players in the NBA playoffs that remain. And also we are going to be looking ahead to the finals and talking about what the best possible matchups could be and what the biggest storylines would be coming out of those. And then finally, we're going to be wrapping up the final part of the show by talking about the all defensive and all rookie teams that were announced on Tuesday. And we are also going to be talking some updates on the Lakers head coaching situation. So a whole lot of NBA talk to dive into, but before we get into the show, just a reminder to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. To our live viewers, be sure to use the comment section to give us your thoughts on the latest happenings in sports and help make this show as interactive as possible. And if you want to be a bigger part of the show, you can also go to gsmcpodcast.net, leave a tip or donation, and get your comments streaming across the screen. Anything would be greatly appreciated. Starting off the show, though, of course, diving into that game from last night, the Celtics led. Seemed like they were going to pull away on a couple different instances. Now, from the first minute, we saw the 12-0 run that the Celtics came out to. Pacers respond, end up bringing it close by the end of the half. And then in the second half, once again, in the third quarter, it looked like the Celtics were going to pull away. They were constantly attacking the rim, but specifically in those non-Tatum minutes down the stretch of the third quarter, the Pacers made it close once again. And finally in the fourth quarter, the Pacers actually had the lead based off of the Celtics offense getting extremely stagnant. Jayson Tatum and Jaylen Brown both really tightened up. It was Drew Holiday actually that was sort of keeping them in this game. But the Pacers became the first team in NBA history, NBA playoffs history that is, to lose a game while up by 3 or more in the final 10 seconds. And it just feels like this is a game the Pacers had to have, both just for the sake of it was firmly in the grasp of their hands, but it could have also massively swung this series altogether. And instead, it ends up as a disappointing overtime loss. Now, of course, biggest moment of the game was Jaylen Brown knocking down the corner three that tied the game and was able to send it to overtime. LeBron James commented on the play on social media, which had a lot of people talking about that one specific play and the idea of the Pacers not fouling when they were up by 3 points in those closing seconds. Don't give the Celtics a chance to tie the game. Now, I do think that people are sort of talking about the philosophy, which I do agree with. As a fan, I always want to see the game play out, but if I were a coach, I would absolutely always default to not letting the opposing team tie up the game. But part of the issue in this scenario was the fact that Jaylen Brown caught it in the corner, and yes, he gave a pump fake, but he was basically in a shooting motion from the time that he caught the ball. It was a Derek White screen that opened him up in the corner that gave him just enough space from Pascal Siakam that he was able to cleanly catch the ball, and then Siakam was closing out. Just that little half second of time in between Brown catching the ball and Siakam arriving to him. The second that Siakam went to foul, Jaylen Brown was going to pull up and draw 3 free throws. And the whole idea behind this fouling when you're up by 3 is to make sure that the opposing team can't tie the game. And ultimately, the Celtics were going to get 3 free throws out of this situation. Now, Jaylen Brown has struggled from the free throw line all season, and then that has led into the postseason where he's shooting just 62% from the free throw line. So if that is your argument that you would be more comfortable with putting Brown at the line, I can't say you are wrong necessarily, but I also thought that Pascal Siakam had a really good contest on the play. Now, yes, his hands could have been up maybe, and he could have, but he was all up in the grill of Jaylen Brown anyways and forced him to hit an extremely difficult fadeaway shot from the corner with the pressure on the line. I can't necessarily beat up Rick Carlisle for not fouling in that instance. Now, the use of timeouts, I think, was the bigger misdeed from Rick Carlisle in not calling timeouts down the stretch there, where the Pacers turned the ball over twice in the final 30 seconds. The biggest scenario, I thought, where Carlisle should have stepped in was on the Tyrese Halliburton inbound on the side where he ends up throwing it to Pascal Siakam, sprinting full speed back towards his own baseline, where even then it would have been a little bit of a tricky situation where you have a non-primary ball handler in Siakam getting trapped on the side of the court, where it would have just been dicey there even if they had gotten that inbounds. But again, this felt like down the stretch of the fourth quarter, the Pacers really did give this game away, and ultimately it took a heroic shot by Jaylen Brown to end up sending this to overtime, and then from there, Jayson Tatum, it feels like we've seen this time and time again, really. The fact that he's sort of setting himself up for some degree of slander from the national media, even though he had a very good game, I thought, last night. The fourth quarter, we saw him and the Celtics offense tighten up, which is a very common recurring theme with them, and it seemed like Tatum was going to be the number one target for the national media coming into today, but then he was incredible in overtime, and he posted a really good stat line. And again, I know that the fourth quarter wasn't good for him, but on the night as a whole, I thought he was really impressive. He finishes this game with 36 points and 12 rebounds. The rebounding aspect of this game we'll be getting to shortly, but given the fact that there is no Kristaps Porzingis and how aged Al Horford clearly looks right now, those rebounds are significant, especially because the Celtics were getting hurt by those offensive rebounds down the stretch of this game in the third and fourth quarters. But I think that ultimately here, it was a great team effort because Jayson Tatum, he was incredible by himself. I would have liked to see him be a little bit even more aggressive because of the fact that he and Jaylen Brown both, anytime they wanted to drive on the Pacers, they were having success. And specifically, the matchups against their guards, Tyrese Halliburton and Andrew Nembhard, really neither one of them could put up much resistance when the Celtics were looking to attack the rim. And that's where, in the fourth quarter, the Pacers were sort of locking the Celtics down, and it felt like there should have been a scenario where there is a glaring opening on that Indiana defense that we know all season long has not been effective. They allow the most points in the paint out of any team in the NBA this season, and it seemed like they sort of turned away from that when they were having great success both in the third quarter when they built up that 15 or so point lead, and then once again in overtime where they stopped shooting threes. Thought that it was really smart of Joe Mazzulla to put the ball in Derek White's hands more down the stretch, and Derek White, it's not like he was flawless in this game. I was also hoping that he would be more aggressive because he had the Tyrese Halliburton matchup, and it seemed like he wasn't really taking advantage of that. He also had the really bad foul in overtime where off of the Jayson Tatum turnover, Derek White, who had gotten blocked by Tyrese Halliburton on a three-point attempt from behind, he sort of tried to get his revenge, and it ended up as a really bad foul for him. But ultimately, I do think that White had a good game here. 15 points, 9 assists, 6 rebounds. He hit a big three-pointer in that fourth quarter around that 3-minute mark to sort of help the Celtics pull this thing back together. Al Horford, for as much as he struggled throughout the night, I think that was another example of somebody who really wasn't all that effective on the night as a whole, but he hit a three-pointer as well at that 3-minute mark that came in handy. But the Al Horford conversation is definitely a pressing one for both perspectives of the team, because it was clear that the Pacers in the second half, and specifically the fourth quarter, you could see Halliburton looking for it in overtime as well. He wanted that Al Horford matchup. This is something that we've seen dating back to, really, I would say, the Cavaliers series when Donovan Mitchell was tearing them up in Game 3. The fact that he just does not have the perimeter defense to be able to stay in front of these crafty guards, and he was just time and time again, as if you go back and you look at overtime, and I know that the Pacers didn't have the best overtime period because of some ball security issues. That is a little bit of a, bigger problem with them, bigger concern, I should say, but that is absolutely something they can continue to attack, and the Celtics are going to need to make adjustments to make sure that that isn't the case, because I would have to imagine that's going to be the Pacers' number one priority headed into next game. It was clear that the Luke Kornet center minutes off of the bench for the Celtics was not effective. Miles Turner was basically unguardable in that first half. Pascal Siakam got going in the second half as well. It seemed like a lot of those free throw line jumpers were over Al Horford, who just couldn't really, he is 37 years old, turning 38 in a couple weeks, and he's playing 40 minutes. That's just too much, which was another example of they need Kristaps Porzingis. Now, they come away with this game without him. I'm curious to see, they could conceivably win without Porzingis in this series in its entirety, but I think the Pacers are a better team, and I've been saying this headed into the second round. They're a better team than a lot of people are giving them credit for, and yes, they've had some injuries that have gone in their favor through this postseason run, but they still sort of are who they've been all season, which is an extremely dynamic offensive team for whatever it means. Obviously, the records are broken just about every season, but the number one offensive rating in NBA history headed into this postseason. Now, that's why last night was a little bit of a fireworks show, because the Celtics were actually number 2 all-time in that category as well. So 2 high-powered offenses, and last night was a shootout. Now, the Celtics feels like they have to do a better job, and the Pacers turned the ball over 20 times, and yet still seemed like they were able to, anytime there were those miscommunications, and again, I love Al Horford as a Celtics fan personally, but his best years are just behind him. I don't think that is, any sort of a crazy take, and they're going to need to be able to help him out moving forward in this series. Now, who is that going to be necessarily? Xavier Tillman was out last night for personal reasons, as long as he has some family stuff going on, so hopefully mentally he will be able to sort of return and be himself, but he's somebody who they could definitely use in this series. Again, I have never really been a fan of the Luke Kornet minutes. I don't know how much more you want to go in that direction, but the small ball possibility with the Celtics is still something that I am looking to, because I don't believe that the Pacers have any post-up threats that can really hurt them. Now, you did see Miles Turner, especially in that first half when he was going, the couple of instances that he got Derek White on him when he was on the block, he had no problem whatsoever just going up over White and knocking down those shots. I mention that because it does seem like, if the Celtics were to go with this small ball direction we have seen Drew Holiday, especially this was more the Celtics idea at the beginning of the beginning of the regular season, I should say, that they were having Drew Holiday match up against opposing bigs, and he did a really good job of it then. Now, Miles Turner, if he's going to be comfortable with that size mismatch, that may not be an option, but I also see no reason why Jayson Tatum wouldn't be able to hold his against Miles Turner in the post. Turner is a very good offensive player, and he's just a very good player because obviously defense, he has his impacts as well, but I just don't believe that he is necessarily somebody who is going to absolutely punish you if you go on a little bit of a smaller end. And there were definitely some takeaways from Joe Mazzulla. I don't think he coached a flawless game by any means, especially late in the game. There was some really weird clock management stuff, the decision to foul in overtime when they were already in the bonus, and then there was the whole debacle with the allowing offensive rebounds and the Pacers getting extra free throws with a chance to make it a one-possession game, which they ultimately do. But I think that he's going to have to figure out some sort of a solution ultimately for what are they going to do with Al Horford and this big man position, because 40 minutes a game is not going to cut it for Horford, who also has been mightily struggling from the three-point line. The Pacers are going to leave him open until they make him pay. And, in a 4-game sample size, at least as of late, where the Cavaliers, we saw them sort of take on this adaptation down the stretch of that series, Al Horford has not been able to make opposing teams pay. Now, he was great in the closeout game where he was 6 of 13 from 3, but since then he has hit just, I believe it is 3 of 22 from there between games 3 and 4 in the Cleveland series and game 1 last night. So that is really bad, obviously. And again, I think they're going to have to come up with some other adjustments. But, it seems like this does really hurt the Pacers because, like I mentioned, this was a young team, and by no means do I think they're going to roll over, but there would have been an extra level of confidence that would have been instilled in them if they were able to win this game and head into a second game in Boston with a 1-0 series lead. We know that they are still undefeated at home as well, so it seems like they could have conceivably built up a potential 3-1 lead. Now, obviously, that's getting way ahead of ourselves, but I think that that's a very deflating loss for Indiana because they just kept giving the Celtics these opportunities to stay in it in the fourth quarter, where the Celtics weren't able to come through their first couple chances, and then ultimately 2 turnovers later, the Celtics hit an improbable shot, and this ends up going down as a Celtics win. But let me know what your thoughts were in the comments section. I think there is a ton to unpack in this series, and we're going to continue to do so as it progresses. But Pacers, in my eyes, showed that they can no doubt compete, and I don't think that, at least for me personally, that was ever all that much of a question. But we have seen the Celtics play. Typically, they give one game away to their opponents where they are sloppier, they aren't shooting as well from 3. This seemed like a game where Pacers really should have come away with it, and curious to see how it's going to impact. Again, I think that Carlisle, as much as he is under a level of scrutiny this morning, I do think that he is still a good coach. There's still plenty of talent on this Pacers team, and they have their identity that they just have to continue to stick to. And if the Celtics defense can't step up, that is, this could continue to be interesting. But again, let us know what your thoughts are in the comments section. But I want to sort of step away from this series in particular, and I'm going to be going through my top 10 players that are remaining in the conference finals. So stick with us through the break, and I will give you my rankings after this quick break. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. wanna be the greatest. Everybody on the fake shit. I look around and feel like everybody is the fakest. I make this every day and I'm impatient. Hoping one day I blow up from the basement. Statement, the top is so vacant. I don't hear shit that I think is amazing. Waiting for my day when I'm playing. Sold out shows for 1,000 faces. Hey, give me that crown. Get in my way and to be put down. It ain't your place, all this my sound. If I want that shit, then I'll get it right now. I'm losing it, the news if it's some losing shit. A stupid myth. You choose to live or choose to dip. You choose to fight or lose your grip and lose a gift. Oh.
I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind? Please, Lord, give me a sign, a sign. I feel like I'm losing my mind. Is everybody in the world blind?
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Just talked about the Celtics-Pacers series, but now going a little bit bigger picture, I am going to be giving my rankings for the top players remaining in the NBA playoffs in the conference finals. Now, I want to come out and say that this was, I think, through the top of it, a pretty straightforward picks for me. There were a couple sort of debatable picks in there that I'm sure some people will be possibly unhappy with. Some honorable mentions that I wanted to throw out there were Derek White, Jaden McDaniels, and Drew Holiday. I thought that the top 9 were sort of locked in for me in terms of they had to be there by any means. And then I really struggled with who to put at that number 10 spot. White, McDaniels, Drew Holiday, they all provide that two-way game and are incredibly important glue guys, but somebody had to be left out, and I had to sort of put these guys to the side. But on that note, who were they edged out for? At number 10, I had Kristaps Porzingis, where this is somebody who has been a massive scoring threat throughout his career, and I do think that his post defense has sort of fallen a little bit under the radar. Now, through just sort of as a disclaimer here, this is assuming everybody is fully healthy, which will definitely come into effect when we look at the top of this ranking as well. But Porzingis is, a borderline all-star player. The part of the main reason I don't think that he did make it, probably wouldn't have made it off rip, but in terms of he would have been in contention for being a reserve if it weren't for the fact that he missed as many games as he did. But he provides such a unique scoring aspect, especially to this Celtics team, that he's been viewed all season long, really, by a lot of people as the X factor for the Celtics, that if he can perform at the level that we know he can, that would be sort of the guarantee that the Celtics could win the NBA Finals. And I still feel like even today the Celtics are in a position where I don't think they can win the finals against either the Mavericks or the Timberwolves if Porzingis isn't playing for them. Like we talked about as an example of Game 1 last night against the Pacers, late down the stretch of that game, the Pacers just continued to put Al Horford in these switches. Halliburton calling for the Miles Turner screen. The Celtics switch everything typically. So just a situation where, and in terms of, well, maybe you don't switch everything. Once you get to the finals, if it is Luka, if it is Kyrie, you can't afford to drop down on those types of plays. So I have Kristaps Porzingis at number 10. Number 9, I have Pascal Siakam. I know he's not everybody's favorite player, but he is an incredibly effective scorer. We saw last night he was quiet in the first half, but all playoffs long, he has been so good at taking advantage of mismatches. And yes, we know that there are some limitations to his offensive game, but at the same time, he makes difficult shot after difficult shot. And the way that he has been able to sort of extend his range out a little bit more, at least from the corners. Now, above the break, other teams are going to live with him potentially firing away from three, but I still think that he is somebody who fits almost seamlessly into this Pacers identity. I don't even think the Pacers last night ran with as much pace as they would have preferred to. But the scorer that Siakam is, and he's no slouch on the defensive end whatsoever either, I had to put him at number 9. Number 8, I have Rudy Gobert. Gobert is somebody who, depending on what style of basketball you prefer, you could have Rudy Gobert higher up on this list, or you could potentially try and even bump him off this list altogether, because he does seem like, to some degree, especially when you come to the postseason and you're playing these teams in a best-of-7 series, there are some instances where Gobert may not even be able to be on the court if they are facing an elite level of spacing on the other end, and if there is nobody to hide him. So, Gobert is one of the all-time defenders. Again, it feels almost, for me, I think it feels wrong to put him this low on the list, but we are going to see the Timberwolves tip off against the Mavericks tonight. Specifically, once the Mavericks are able to get Maxi Kleber back in the series, which sounds like he is probable to return at some point, but we don't really have all that much of a timeline yet. I think that could end up really hurting Rudy Gobert. To see a final series against the Celtics and Kristaps Porzingis is playing, could be a similar situation there. But Gobert, no doubt, has a massive impact on the defensive side of the floor, so I had him at number 8. Number 7, I have another Timberwolf in Karl Anthony Towns, where Towns is somebody who is undeniably an all-star talent. Offensively, he is tremendous, and the leaps that he has taken defensively, specifically the role that he took on in that series against the Denver Nuggets, has to be, very highly commended. Now, Towns was an all-star this year. Me personally, I would have preferred to see maybe either one of the Kings players really in Sabonis or Fox over him, but that's a whole nother conversation that I don't want to dive into right now. Towns is an incredible talent. He's sort of talked about the fact that he believes he is one of the best shooting bigs in the history of the sport. I think he said specifically that he is the best, and a lot of people sort of rolled their eyes at that, but the reality is he is absolutely a threat from the perimeter and causes tons of mismatch problems in the NBA, and we've seen him so far in this postseason do a really good job of being able to sort of hold up from a three-point perspective, and I expect that to continue on here. Now, he's not without some flaws in the fouls and actually being able to stay on the court, which kind of drives me crazy. He's the second best player on the Timberwolves, but he's playing 32 minutes per game because of the fact that he has frequently gotten himself into foul trouble, and that is something that we have to see dip down if the Timberwolves are going to continue to make this run, and I have full faith in this Timberwolves team. I have them coming out of the Western Conference Finals, but Towns, he needs to be available for them is the number one thing, and I ultimately had him 7 here. I think that he is somebody you could definitely potentially put a little bit higher up. There is a debate with this next player here where I have Tyrese Halliburton at number 6. Now, I think that this might even feel low for Halliburton as well. Again, outside of, probably the top 7, I think are all, legitimate all-star caliber players, and even you could potentially try and throw Rudy Gobert in there. I mean, defensive player of the year, take with that what you will, but I think that this category here of Gobert, Tyrese Halliburton, they all sort of have these somewhat glaring flaws that do sort of knock them down a little bit. Now, I don't think that I'm getting too caught up in the recency bias of this, but Halliburton was a sieve last night defensively, where it seemed like when the Celtics offense was playing at its best, it's because they were attacking Tyrese Halliburton as much as they possibly could. And that's something that I think, they stuck him on Derek White towards the end of that game, and it seemed like White wasn't as willing to attack, but that's something that if I'm the Celtics, I'm looking to adjust to moving forward in this series. But what was also really positive to see last night was the level of aggression was back for Tyrese Halliburton. There's been plenty of conversations about his tentativeness over the course of this postseason, and last night, the late turnovers is absolutely a killer for him. But he's a young player, and he's going to continue to develop. But I also do think there are, learning moments that occur in the postseason. And when I put this list together, I looked at it from the perspective of, if I'm trying to win a playoff series today, who am I taking first? And I ultimately have Halliburton falling to 6 in this list, behind Kyrie Irving as my number 5 pick. Kyrie is somebody that we all sort of know. You just kind of trust Kyrie in these big moments no matter what. And I think he's had a very successful postseason so far. Now, the conversation surrounding, this whole identity of being a team player, and the fact that he has been a little bit more passive at times, and seems like he's been, at least from a scoring perspective, a little bit invisible, but he has done a very good job on the defensive end, making effort plays that we haven't seen from him before in his career. And ultimately, when it comes to Kyrie, if you are looking at one individual player to take the big shot in a Game 7, it is hard to find many better options than Kyrie Irving. So I had him ultimately at number 5 in this one. Speaking of knocking down a big shot, we have the man from last night in Jaylen Brown. Now, Brown has been obviously an incredible player through a lot of his career. He's going to potentially be on the All-NBA team, probably third team. We saw him be selected to that last year as well. But one of the most impressive parts for Jaylen this season was the fact that he was able to develop on the defensive side of the ball. And that's something that when he was first coming into the NBA, it was sort of a high point of his game, but it seemed like he sort of almost fell off. That feels a little bit harsh, but at least in terms of his off-the-ball defense, it seemed like he got lazy at times, and he's definitely ramped that up as the Celtics have tried to buy into this idea of sacrifice and coming together. And Brown ended up getting multiple first-team all-defensive votes this year, where I believe he had 3 of which, so he ultimately got left off of the all-defensive teams altogether, but he's massively improved on that side of the ball, averaging 23 points per game on offense, and hit the big shot for them last night. Brown is just somebody that I think can be, any team can benefit from having a Jaylen Brown. He doesn't necessarily strike me as, he's somebody who could put up massive stats on any team, but this version of Jaylen Brown where he's playing a team game is just really fun to see in my eyes, so I had him at number 4. Now, I want to get out here and say number 3 and number 2 are an extremely close call to me, both going to be all-NBA players, but I went with Anthony Edwards here at number 3. I'll just get out ahead of it a little bit here. He and Jayson Tatum, who I have at number 2, are extremely close matchups, and I talked about this earlier in the postseason, where I believe that Jayson Tatum today is the better player than Anthony Edwards. Now, if you want to look at it from a trade value perspective and who's going to have a better career, probably lean in favor of Anthony Edwards, but there are playoff scars with Tatum that I think that he has sort of learned from, where Anthony Edwards could be sitting at home right now if the rest of his team didn't step up when he was 6 of 24 from the field in a Game 7 matchup. And I think that ultimately for him, he is an incredible talent. And I would say that generally speaking, I would call him a better scorer than Jayson Tatum, but I think that Tatum does all of the other things a lot better than Anthony Edwards, where he is a better passer, he is a better rebounder, he is a better defender on a possession-to-possession basis, and that is not to take away from Edwards whatsoever, because as we're going to talk about in the next segment, he is one of the, faces of the league moving forward. But I think that right now, and as we sort of get into it here, Jayson Tatum is just somebody who I expect to step up in these big moments. And listen, if you want to throw the fourth quarter at me from last night, go for it. I still think that Tatum was incredible. He was a plus 20 on the court in a 5-point win, and it was very clear that any moment that he wasn't available for them, things got worse. And you can make a very similar case for Anthony Edwards as well. I think that if you want to go the entire NBA outside of this playoff conversation, Tatum and Edwards are probably just about 1 or 2 spots off from one another as well there. But let me know in the comments section what your thoughts are. This was a very close call for me. And then number 1, not really all that much of a debate, I feel like, is Luka Doncic. Now, the injury aspect with Luka, knowing that he's not fully healthy, was the one thing that sort of made me second guess. So I gave myself a little bit of an out and said, assuming all of these players are healthy, it has to be Luka. And it's really not, again, I don't think that it's a debate when all these players are fully healthy that it is Luka. The ability to hit all of the big shots just like Kyrie, be the big-time scorer, the playmaker, everything about it. He can be an absolute hub of the offense, and we have seen improved defensive efforts from him as well. We know that he's a good rebounder, so all of it plays in. I think if you are trying to win a playoff series today, Luka, out of all of the players that are currently still remaining in the postseason, I think it has to be Luka Doncic. But let me know what your thoughts on my rankings are in the comment section. This was a pretty fun exercise to go through for me, although I know that a lot of people are probably going to be mad at me because all of this is pretty much subjective. But we are now going to be taking our second break of the show, and when we come back on the other side, I want to dive into the All-NBA, or we're going to talk about the matchups that we could see in the finals with all of these players, what the best matchups and top storylines could be. So stick with us, and we will be right back.
Looking for your daily fix of sports talk without having to pay for it? GSMC Sports Network is available on YouTube. Just search GSMC Sports Network. Get your fix of daily sports talk shows on YouTube, absolutely free. NFL, college football, NBA, MLB, MMA, UFC, fantasy football, and so much more. GSMC Sports Network has shows running all day long, with new sports shows starting every 2 hours. Just like on your favorite cable sports channel, except GSMC Sports Network is absolutely free. Just search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube to catch one of your new favorite shows, like the GSMC College Football Podcast, Chip Shot Football Podcast, Hoops and Heels Women's Sports Podcast, GSMC Basketball Podcast, and so many more. Check it out for yourself. GSMC Sports Network, now available on YouTube absolutely free. Search GSMC Sports Network on YouTube right now.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. We're now going to be looking ahead with those Final Four teams that are remaining in the NBA playoffs. I want to talk about what the best types of matchups we could see in the finals could be and what the top storylines would be coming out of those. So it's obviously been talked about plenty up to this point that the youth movement is one of the biggest remaining stories in the postseason. CBS put out a stat yesterday that said this is just the second time in NBA history that each of the Final Four remaining teams in the playoffs has an all-star in their age 25 season or younger. important to note that Tatum did just turn 26, but this is still technically his age 25 season. So all of this bakes into the conversation that has been an overarching storyline on the season, which is who is going to be the face of the league moving forward. And I think that the top two names that have been talked about in this light are Anthony Edwards and Jayson Tatum, like I just talked about in the player ranking segment. I think they are neck and neck. Now, Tatum has a couple years on Anthony Edwards, and Edwards is no doubt a more flashy player. He's extremely marketable as well, so I would say that he is probably the favorite in that conversation, but Tatum is also an incredible talent in his own right. He's extremely composed. He is a role model. Of course, him and Deuce going everywhere together. So I think that they are both awesome candidates for this conversation. And I also believe that the Timberwolves and the Celtics are the best two teams in the NBA. Nuggets could be a conversation. I still feel like the Nuggets would beat the Celtics if the two teams were to face off against one another in the postseason. But at least if we're talking remaining teams, I think that it's the Timberwolves and the Celtics, and I don't really have all that much doubt. Now, the Mavericks, that series is still going to be interesting, so by no means do I want to discount the Mavericks. I think the Timberwolves on paper are the better roster, but like I talked about in my show yesterday, there are certain play style things that could absolutely come into play, and the Mavericks could be a difficult matchup for the Timberwolves. But again, ultimately, I think that Edwards versus Tatum for that front runner spot in terms of being the future face of the league, having that finals MVP under their belt would be the number one storyline I think that could come out of this. The Timberwolves aren't necessarily from this big market, but still it seems like everybody has gravitated towards Anthony Edwards, and I think that that level of stardom himself, kind of shows that what level of a face of the league he could be, that tons of people now care about the Minnesota Timberwolves, although I think that from a casual standpoint, ESPN and these national companies probably didn't do the Timberwolves all that much justice during the regular season in terms of promoting them, but they are now officially arrived and everybody is aware of them. So I think that that would be a fascinating matchup. Again, the storyline of Edwards versus Tatum for the face of the league. Now, in this whole face of the league conversation, I also think that a Luka Doncic finals MVP could make things very, very interesting, because I do think that there is absolutely a nationality component to this conversation, where just from a, pure marketing standpoint of a league that is based out of America, I think that the NBA would probably prefer having an American player be the one who is dominating the league, is extremely marketable and such. But Luka Doncic has a chance to sort of show that the NBA isn't necessarily an American league anymore, where we are in this sort of era of the fact that Giannis and Jokic have won 2 of the last 3 finals MVPs. Luka could enter himself in this conversation to make it 3 of 4, and the fact that we haven't seen an American-born MVP since 2018, this could be the beginning of the national overseas era in the NBA, and I am absolutely fascinated by the expansion of the NBA across borders. I'm all for it. I want to see the Olympics get this extra juice to it and such, but I think that Luka is somebody who could probably take that over from an international standpoint. Jokic absolutely probably already would have up to this point if that was something that he really cared about. Giannis is also still in that conversation, both of those players in their late 20s, but Luka just turned 25 years old. I expect him to, be a prominent force in the NBA for at least another decade, as long as, knock on wood, everything works out for him. But Luka could be, sort of the bright up-and-coming face of this international era. And again, Jokic has already won 3 MVPs and a national championship. We've seen Giannis with his accolades as well. But again, I think that Luka is probably the one that could take it over as LeBron James and his era of greats come out of the league, that it is Luka rising up at that same time and can sort of take the throne in that sense. And again, I said that this is sort of could be the beginning of this national era, because we just saw Victor Wembanyama get drafted first overall this past year. He is already making arguments that he is a top 10 player in the league. Now, I don't want to necessarily dive into all of that right now, but Wemby is going to be a prominent force moving forward. Should be a perennial all-star from here on out, probably all-NBA as well. Kevin O'Connor, I listened to the Bill Simmons podcast this morning, and he said that he expects Victor Wembanyama to be the best player in the league by midway through next season. Now, I think that that's getting out ahead of ourselves maybe a little bit, but Wemby, there's no doubt the talent is there, and I think that, he, along with, I know that there's not necessarily viewed as that superstar talent in the upcoming draft, but there are likely going to be 3 lottery picks this year that are going to be foreign-born players in Alex Sarr, Zachary Risache, and Nikola Topic. So, going to be really interesting to see how that all plays out as well, at least in terms of the face of the league conversation. I also feel like, sticking with the Dallas Mavericks, there's a chance we could get a Kyrie Irving versus Boston series, which would definitely, again, I've talked about this before, I am a Celtics fan, but I fully understand that the Celtics fan base is one of the most toxic fan bases in the NBA, and you can make an argument for sports in general as well. A lot of bad blood here between Kyrie and Boston. Now, I think that a lot of maybe more rational Celtics fans have probably gotten to a point where it's just really fun to see him play basketball, and I've really appreciated watching him through this postseason run doing what he does. That being said, he's going to be talking some smack to Celtics fans if that were to become a series, and at least for the time being, if that were to take place, I would probably, go back to my roots a little bit of how ugly of an ending it was with him in Boston, but I think that would be, incredibly fun to watch. I think the Mavericks would have a very good chance in that series as well, so that would be a really fun one for me. Keep talking about the Celtics here because they are the team with all the pressure in the world really on their shoulders, more so than any of these other teams, where it seems like out of the final 4 teams that remain, it's almost being chalked up as a success already for the Pacers, Timberwolves, and Mavericks, where the Celtics, this is kind of where their season begins. Like, the fact that they won 64 games during the regular season doesn't mean anything. Conference finals is pretty much, and not even necessarily in an arrogant way from a Celtics fan perspective, but everybody talks about it, that the expectation for the Celtics is winning a championship, and they haven't done so since 2008, and it seems like they do keep coming up short in these instances, and now it's up to them, with the amount of talent that they have on their roster, to actually bring it home. So that is obviously a massive storyline as well. If they aren't able to win the championship, there are going to be a variety of different storylines coming out of it. The idea of who or what is it that's holding them back. I think worst case for the Celtics, honestly, to some degree, is Kristaps Porzingis not being healthy and having that as a little bit of a baked-in excuse, which I do think it would be a very big deal. And I do feel like if Kristaps Porzingis is healthy, they can beat, and not just that they can, they should beat anybody remaining in the playoffs. But if that isn't the case, there is, if Porzingis isn't healthy, there's a real chance that they could be a little bit stagnant and hesitant to make any types of moves. But, going to be interesting to see how this plays out for the Celtics. And then the last sort of note I wanted to make here is, Minnesota, at least social media is the worst the majority of the time, but definitely good inspiration if you're talking about different storylines that could come out. The Jimmy Butler factor of this, where Jimmy Butler sort of came into Minnesota for one season, brought them to the playoffs, ended their postseason drought, and on his way out was basically like, these guys are losers, they can't win. And if Karl Anthony Towns were to win a finals along with Andrew Wiggins, who won one in 2022, and have Butler without one, obviously not the same scenarios. We're just talking storylines here. I don't think it would be fair to hold that against Jimmy, but it would be a reality. And, you know, if Minnesota is to win the finals, it's more than likely, I would say probably, 85% sure Anthony Edwards would be the finals MVP. But there's also a world where Karl Anthony Towns could win it. That would be maybe, it would be a huge accomplishment for a very talented player. I think there would be a comedic aspect to it, though, where Cat has been sort of talked down on so much among NBA fans, and for him to go out and win a finals MVP would, I think, would be very funny and would absolutely make for some interesting conversations over the off season about who are the rankings of the different bigs in the NBA. But let me know what you want to see in the NBA Finals, what your ideal matchup would be. I know that for a lot of people it is, if either Luka or Ant wins Finals MVP, they're going to be okay with that. But again, give us your thoughts in the comment section. But we're going to be taking our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, we're going to be diving into the all-rookie and all-defensive teams that were just announced within the past couple days. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.
For the best and latest podcasts available anywhere, go to the podcast app on your cell phone and type in GSMC to access free content-rich podcasts on health and wellness, book reviews, sports, entertainment, relationships, social media, movies, technology, finance, and even weird news. Subscribe and download the GSMC Podcast Network's family of shows, available everywhere podcasts are found.
Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast, headed into our fourth segment of the day, and we are going to be talking about the all-defense and all-rookie teams that have been announced over the past couple days. So we're going to start with defense because I have some thoughts on that. This was the first year that the NBA decided that it would be positionless in the voting ballots for both the all-NBA teams and the all-defense teams, and that definitely came into effect with these defense teams, where we saw 4 centers make the first team. It was Rudy Gobert, Victor Wembanyama, Bam Adebayo, Anthony Davis, and Herb Jones was the 5th option. Shout out Herb Jones, one of my favorite players in the league. But then the second team had no big men, where it was Alex Caruso, Jalen Suggs, Derek White, Drew Holiday, and Jaden McDaniels. So 4 centers on the first team, 4 guards on the second team. And I do think that this is probably going to become a common precedent moving forward. Now, I don't necessarily love it. I feel like there should be some way to, show love, because perimeter defenders are absolutely important. And having a point of attack guard defender is a massive deal in the NBA. Definitely not making any types of bold statements there. But that being said, if you were to ask me, out of these 10 players that made the first couple teams, who would you choose to, if we were drafting the number 1 defensive options, you're going to lean in favor of the big men more times than not, unless there is, an extreme elite guard available. And I just think that this is going to be a very common thing moving forward here, where it's going to be an overwhelming number of big men on the first team. And listen, it's not something that I am going to really get up in arms about. At the end of the day, it is what it is. But I just thought it was something notable that this is going to be sort of the beginning of a new era in those eyes. As far as the selections for who made these teams, I don't really disagree with any of the placements here, where I want to say that these were probably the 10 players I put on my, quote unquote ballot when I did my version of picking for the all defensive teams. I think that Lou Dort is probably the number one player that could have also slid onto this list. He was the number one snub in terms of total points that were left off the ballots, followed up by Kawhi Leonard, Chet Holmgren. Jarrett Allen is somebody who also could have been in consideration for this selection as well. But again, ultimately, I thought that the top 10 that they came up with was a good list. But at the same time, I just kind of wish, even if it was, reserving one spot for a guard, I think that should be something that they take into consideration. Now, I don't expect that to be a change in the coming future, and partially because as I talk this out, I can't think of an overwhelming reason as to, why they should make this change, other than looking back at the history of the NBA. It's going to be, much more slanted against guards moving forward in terms of, for whatever it means. Hall of Fame voting is already kind of a joke because it is so easy for players to get into the Hall of Fame that I don't know if a first team selection versus a second team selection is really going to be what sort of ends up skewing a player from not making it. But I don't know. I feel like there's got to be some element of at least maintaining a little bit of the history, because I'm really curious to see when the next time we're going to have a guard win the first team honors. But let me know in the comments section if you think I'm sort of out of line on this. Again, I know that this feels like, at least for me, a little bit of an irrational, dislike on my part, but it's just something that I don't know. I have opinions on somewhat strongly. So again, let me know what your thoughts are on that. But moving on to the rookie teams, we saw the first team of Chet Holmgren, Jaime Jaquez Jr., Brandon Miller, Brandon Pajemski, and Victor Wembanyama on the first team. And on the second team, it was Keontae George, Gigi Jackson, Derek Lively, Amen Thompson, and Cason Wallace. Now, it's funny because when I did do my initial picks for this as well, I had Gigi Jackson on the list. This is the one award that games played does not take into consideration. So, I sort of went with that because I just loved watching Gigi Jackson this year. I had a weird bias for the Grizzlies where I had just about as much fun watching them on a nightly basis as just about every other team because of how hard they played. They always made things competitive when they shouldn't have. They were tremendous defensively. I'm a little bit of a sicko in that sense where I don't think that anybody was really having all that much fun watching the Grizzlies, but I was. I had a little bit of sort of second thoughts on Gigi Jackson following the fact that I do think that there are some, other options there that have more of a body of work, but I'm ultimately not mad about how this played out. I know there was a little bit of outrage because Scoot Henderson did not make any of these teams. Now, he wasn't a real consideration for me, I don't think, in the long run with this conversation. I saw a stat here according to Clutch Points on Twitter where Scoot Henderson led all rookies in assists per game and was fourth in scoring and didn't make any of the teams. He becomes the first third overall pick to fail to do so, make an All-NBA team since R.J. Barrett in 2019. I think that there were flashes with Scoot Henderson that showed he wasn't necessarily, I'm not completely out on him in terms of, I was very high on him coming into the league, and I'm definitely not willing to sell all my stock just yet. But there were other players who had more successful seasons than him. So he falls third in terms of the total points for players who did not make the all-rookie team. Trayce Jackson-Davis was second, and it was Ausar Thompson Trayce Jackson-Davis was first to not make it. Ausar Thompson was second. So I do think that Trayce Jackson-Davis, based off of his full body of work, could have definitely been a conversation here, and he ultimately falls just 1 point short of making this all-rookie team behind G.G. Jackson. So I do think that there can be a little bit of a debate for that final spot, but for the most part, I think that they got this right. Now, I also probably would have leaned in favor of Derek Lively being named to the first team over Jaime Jaquez Jr., who Jaquez had a great rookie season, but he did sort of struggle down the, month by month. We saw his shooting split sort of get worse until I think the very end in April. He may have had an uptick again, but he had a stronger start to the season than he did the finish. Derek Lively was a very impactful player for a good team in the Mavericks. We see the defensive intensity that he brings, the rebounding, all of that, I do think is very valuable. So, again, not something that I necessarily have a massive problem with. Now, it wasn't even close between for the voting, where Jaquez had 89 first-place votes and Lively had just 26. So something that I at least thought was worth noting, but at the end of the day, I'm not necessarily mad about the results of either of these teams, but let me know if you think anybody was snubbed. But we are going to be taking our final break of the show, and when we come back on the other end, we have some updates on the Los Angeles Lakers coaching search that I want to dive into, so stick with us, and we will be right back. Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast for our final segment of the show. We're going to be giving some updates on the Lakers coaching situation. They, of course, fired Darvin Ham after they were eliminated from the postseason, and the search for the next coach is on. And it is sort of interesting to see the Lakers have so much to sort of handle in this offseason. Of course, LeBron James approaching free agency and whether or not he is going to stick around there. My very brief thoughts on that are that I think that he is going to stick around. I think that he really enjoys living out there in LA, around Hollywood. He has his family all set up there. I don't think he's going anywhere, at least for this season. Maybe let Bronny James settle into wherever he ends up following the draft before sort of coming and stealing the show from him. LeBron has more than 1 year left, so he still has some time, I think, to sort of work his way to a situation where he can play with his son. But there was an interesting report from Brian Windhorst yesterday that could possibly sort of go against that. and that is that Brian Windhorst of ESPN said LeBron James told the front office that they should be prioritizing the head coaching search around Anthony Davis instead of himself. Davis is thought to be the person who's going to take over long-term for the Lakers there. He has 2 more full seasons under contract, a player option headed into 2027-28, where I feel like the Lakers are probably going to want to keep him happy and keep him around, but there's obviously still a ton of time between now and then where we'll figure out how that works out. But Davis does have sort of the more long-term potential of being a Laker, and I think that plays into part of it. I also think that LeBron is probably sick of being so heavily attached to the conversation surrounding coaches in the past, which has been a narrative that has sort of followed him around for a while, specifically from his second stint in Cleveland. I thought is when he was sort of at the peak of his power and his influence on an organization, and he's been, again, sort of associated with the coaching situations as well as kind of roster moves as well. And I think to some degree LeBron at this age is probably sick of that a little bit. So he wants to make it very clear that he has no say in the coach. If the coach doesn't work out, it's not on him, especially as we have all of these rumors coming out about the potential of JJ Redick joining the Lakers as the head coach, knowing that LeBron and Redick have this outstanding relationship anyways before he even were to potentially come to the Lakers. But, you know, ultimately, I think that is the right decision, and for whatever reason it is, I'm glad that LeBron is sort of understanding the situation as a whole, and that he doesn't know how much longer he's going to be with the Lakers. It seems like at times he is sort of, specifically if you look at the previous trade deadline, he was sort of trying to put pressure on the organization to mortgage their future, whatever future picks they have, in order to improve the roster this season. And ultimately, I don't believe there was a move that would have made them a true finals contender this season alone. So there's a whole lot to unpack with the Lakers' upcoming offseason. But as far as the head coaching search, I want to give some brief thoughts on that. We'll start with JJ Redick, considering the fact that just mentioned his name. Redick is somebody who I do believe has a future in coaching in the NBA, and it sounds like that's something that he is really interested in. And I would like to see him in that role, because JJ Redick is one of the best minds in sports media, best basketball minds in sports media right now, and I feel like I learn a lot from listening to him, and I'd like to see sort of how that plays into the coaching realm. But I would definitely feel a little bad for JJ Redick if this was his first landing spot, because it's under all the spotlight, all the pressure, and I don't see this necessarily working out for him in LA, where there are a lot of roster holes, and I kind of feel like the Lakers, they might just be past their contention window right now. They can still be a playoff team for the foreseeable future as long as they have LeBron and Anthony Davis, but I don't see them as finals contenders headed into next season. Let me know in the comments section if you disagree and why. But I wouldn't be necessarily in favor of Redick joining the Lakers staff, although, again, if this is the opportunity for him, I wouldn't be mad at that whatsoever. But another name that has really started to come up in this coaching search is James Borrego. He was the former head coach of the Charlotte Hornets. He spent some time as well in San Antonio, being on the bench under Popovich for a couple championships, as well as being in New Orleans with Anthony Davis, which is why his name has sort of popped up so much more in contention, is because of this idea of trying to cater more to Anthony Davis. It sounds like they had a positive relationship when they were together. And Borrego was thrown into a disastrous situation in Charlotte, so I definitely wouldn't write him off because of that first stint by any means. I think the Lakers need somebody with maybe a little bit more experience. Again, to the JJ Redick point, there isn't necessarily, a great basketball mind will take you anywhere from a coaching perspective, but as much as I don't believe the Lakers are finals contenders, their front office is going to want finals contention, and you got to have somebody who's a little bit more day one ready for the job in my eyes. So I think Borrego would be a fantastic option for them. Micah Nori, the assistant coach for the Minnesota Timberwolves, that if you watch any of the Timberwolves games, he is the one that is sort of standing in place of Chris Finch, where Chris Finch is still present and, coaching the team, but Micah Nori is the one sort of walking up and down these sidelines now that Finch is dealing with this knee injury, and would be maybe a little bit funny to some degree of the Lakers choosing to go with a coach who stepped in a big moment for a successful team, because that's what they did with Luke Walton in the mid 2010s, where Walton was with the Warriors and Steve Kerr. I think it was when he got back surgery possibly, and Walton stepped in and didn't end up working out for him in LA, about a decade ago, but would be at least a little bit funny to see them sort of follow the same path and see if it would have any bit of a different result. But I do think that Nori is a solid option for them as well. I would lean with Borrego. I would also potentially lean with Sam Cassell, who personally, as a Celtics fan, I would prefer to see him stick around the organization as an assistant coach. He wasn't the number one assistant. That was Charles Lee. He was actually hired by Charlotte this offseason. But Sam Cassell is somebody who's been around the game for a while, former player, of course, and has spent the last 15 years as an assistant coach, and was somebody who could have been in contention for getting a head coaching gig last year. That didn't happen. Now, it could be maybe a year from now if he's going to stick in Boston. I'm sure he becomes the lead assistant, but Cassell is definitely somebody who I think the Lakers could take a swing at from a head coaching standpoint. But let me know what your thoughts are, who you hope the Lakers go out and get, and also curious to hear what you all think about the possibility of the Lakers actually being a finals contender next season. But that is all we have time for today. Thank you very much for tuning into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. Remember to like, follow, subscribe wherever you keep up with us. Check us out on social media as well for more exclusive short content. We are live here every 2 to 3 p.m. Eastern, so we will be back tomorrow. We will see you then. Take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet, damn it.